All right, let's get right into it. Whether you're a seasoned compliance officer out in the field or you're currently tackling the Islamic Banking and Finance Law module over at the School of Law, UOM, well, you have landed in the absolute right place. Today we're unpacking Bank Negara Malaysia's incredibly strict legal framework for the Wakalah agency contract. Now, Wakalah is quite literally a foundational pillar of Islamic finance, but the leap from classical historical theory to modern hard regulation, it's a massive gap. So let's bridge that gap by looking directly at the BNM policy document. Okay, let's dive into our agenda for this explainer. First, we'll be defining the Wakalah contract, then looking at the Bank Negara Malaysia framework. After that, we hit core Sharia requirements, followed by navigating Wakalah fees. Then we look at unauthorized agents and complexities, and finally, operational governance and risk. We're using a bit of a funnel structure here, starting with wide Sharia concepts and narrowing all the way down to hard central bank mandates.
So, Section 1, defining the Wakalah contract, delegation in Islamic law. Let's start with the basics.
Before we get bogged down in regulatory jargon, what does Wakalah actually mean? Literally, the word translates to custody, preservation, or delegation. But in a strictly legal sense, it's an agency contract. Basically, it's an agreement where one party, that's the principal or the muwakkal, explicitly authorizes an agent, the wakil, to perform a specific, delegatable act on their behalf. You know, it's really the ultimate relationship of trust.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how classical Muslim jurists historically defined this exact relationship. If you look at the Shafis, they focus heavily on the delegation of an act between living persons, specifically an act that actually permits delegation in the first place. But the Hanafis, they add this brilliant little nuance. They emphasize that the agent is quite literally taking the place of the principal in a known and permissible dealing. Actually, think of it as stepping directly into the principal's shoes. And honestly, managing that stepping into the shoes concept is exactly what modern regulators are trying to control.
Which brings us right to Section 2, Bank Negara Malaysia Framework, the regulatory reality.
To really ground us in reality, we have to look at the actual source material. Issued on June 24, 2016, this BNM policy document on Wakalah isn't just some helpful guideline. No, this is the definitive regulatory text dictating exactly how Islamic financial institutions have to execute these agency contracts to ensure absolute Sharia compliance. So today, we're going to pull out and dissect the most critical paragraphs right from this text.
So, you might be wondering who actually has to follow these rules. Well, according to paragraph 2.1, the applicability is huge. We're talking licensed Islamic banks, conventional banks, and investment banks that have Islamic business windows, licensed takaful operators, professional re-takaful operators, and even prescribed development financial institutions. If you're a compliance officer or a UAM law student studying the industry, you have to know this. The entire Malaysian Islamic finance ecosystem is completely tethered to this one framework.
All right, moving on to Section 3, Core Sharia Requirements, Rules of Engagement.
Part B of the BNM document lays out the absolute Sharia boundaries that institutions literally cannot cross. Let's look closely at paragraph 18, which covers Wakalah with Kafala, basically combining agency with a guarantee. This actually solves a massive commercial problem. It says an agent can enter into a totally separate contract to guarantee the obligation of a third party. When they do that, they legally assume the role of a guarantor or kafil. So it lets banks structure much safer transactions without breaking that core agency relationship.
But wait, here is the massive caveat, the crucial point, and this is drawn from paragraphs 18.3c and 22.2 regarding investment agencies, or Wakalah bi al-Istithmar, is that the agent absolutely cannot guarantee their own performance, and there's no way they can guarantee the investment capital or the return. Let's look at a real-world example right here in Malaysia, Islamic investment accounts. When you put money into an investment account at a Malaysian Islamic bank, the bank is acting as your agent, your wakil, to invest it. Under these specific paragraphs, they cannot legally promise you won't lose your capital. If they did, well, it would become a loan, which fundamentally destroys the Sharia compliance of the whole Wakalah contract.
Okay, let's pivot to Section 4, Navigating Wakalah Fees, the Cost of Agency.
Obviously, banks aren't doing all this work for free. So how do agents actually get compensated under this strict framework? Usually, it's a Wakalah bi al-Ujra, which is a fee-based agency, where everything is agreed upon upfront. But what if they forget? Or what if the fee just wasn't nailed down before the work started? Paragraph 15.8 brilliantly steps in to protect the agent.
It dictates that if a task is performed without an upfront rate, the agent is legally entitled to ujra al-mith, meaning a market-based fee. It's a great failsafe that ensures fair compensation based on real market rates.
Next up is Section 5, Unauthorized Agents and Complexities, the Fudali Problem.
This is one of the most fascinating complexities in agency law. Imagine someone goes totally rogue and executes a sale for a principal without actual authorization. That's a fuduli. How does the law handle a fuduli sale? Paragraph 16 lays out a beautifully precise if-then mechanism. Step 1. The prospective principal finds out and chooses whether to ratify or not ratify the sale. Step 2. If they ratify it, awesome, the transaction proceeds normally. Step 3. But if they don't ratify it, the sale is entirely rescinded. The assets and proceeds must be strictly returned. It literally just reverses the rogue act.
So at this point, we know the Sharia rules. We know the definitions, the fees, the rules against guaranteeing capital. But that brings up a really practical question. How do massive Islamic banks actually govern these contracts safely in the real world, day to day?
And that brings us to Section 6, Operational Governance and Risk, Institutional Mandates.
This is where the central bank forces theory into practice. Paragraph 23 places a huge dual burden on an institution's leadership. First, the board of directors. They have to actively approve policies, assess agent methodologies, and continuously monitor performance. At the same time, the Sharia committee has to endorse all the legal documentation, ensure every single term complies with Sharia, and assess audit reviews. It's a very intense system of checks and balances. And because we established earlier that the agent can't guarantee your capital, Wakalah is inherently not risk-free for the principal. Because of that, paragraph 25.2 mandates that Islamic financial institutions absolutely must establish robust risk management policies. They're legally required to identify, measure, monitor, and control Wakalah risks at all times.
And BNM was not messing around with enforcement. Back when this was issued, paragraph 28.1 required any institution already offering Wakalah products to submit a formal action plan to JPIT by October 31, 2016. So this wasn't some gentle suggestion. It was a sweeping, strictly enforced operational overhaul.
We've covered a ton of ground today, but I want to leave you with a provocative thought, especially for those law students analyzing market behaviors. If the law strictly dictates that an agent cannot guarantee your investment capital, how does that fundamentally change your risk appetite when utilizing Wakalah in modern finance? It's a huge question that shapes the future of the industry. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking those hard questions.